I never thought my best friend's wife would end up in my arms, especially not while my fiancé was away for the weekend. But when she looked at me with those tear-filled eyes, I couldn't resist. It started with an innocent drink, but by the end of the night, everything changed. Now I can't stop thinking about her, and the worst part? She feels the same way. I always thought I had it all: good looks, a successful career, and a string of relationships that never lasted more than a few months. My name's Ryan, and at 29, I was the guy everyone thought had life figured out. But deep down, I knew I was afraid of something no one else could see: commitment. The closer someone got, the more suffocated I felt. That's why my engagement to Laura was such a shock, to me and everyone who knew me. We'd only been together for 6 months when she told me she was pregnant. I panicked at first, but something about the way she looked at me, hopeful, scared, and excited, made me step up. I proposed, and suddenly, I was an engaged man preparing to be a father. Laura was everything I thought I wanted. She was beautiful, kind, and completely devoted to me. But there was a part of me that felt disconnected, like I was playing the role of a perfect fiancé instead of actually being one. She trusted me completely, which made what happened next even worse. Laura had gone to visit her parents for the weekend, leaving me alone in our apartment. That's when my best friend Mark showed up with a bottle of whiskey and a long story about how his marriage was falling apart. He poured his heart out about how his wife, Rachel, had grown distant and frustrated with him. Mark drank too much and passed out on my couch. That's when Rachel showed up to pick him up. She looked tired. More than that, she looked broken. I offered her a drink and a seat, and before I knew it, we were talking. Rachel opened up about the struggles she'd been facing, balancing work, running their home, and trying to keep their marriage alive. As I listened, I couldn't help but notice how different she was from Laura. Rachel was independent, strong, and determined, yet clearly starved for appreciation. And that's when it happened. The moment I crossed a line I knew I could never step back over. Rachel sat across from me at the kitchen table, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her glass. She laughed softly at one of my jokes, but there was sadness in her eyes, something deeper than exhaustion. I couldn't stop myself from noticing how her dark hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, or how her lips curved slightly when she smiled. As the conversation drifted, Rachel opened up more. She talked about how Mark barely noticed her anymore, how he took her efforts for granted, and how she felt more like his maid than his wife. Every word hit me harder than the last. She deserved better, and part of me hated Mark for not seeing it. I told myself I was just being a good friend, listening and offering comfort. But the more we talked, the more the air between us seemed to shift. Her voice softened, her gaze lingered, and when I refilled her glass, our fingers brushed, just for a moment, but it was enough to send a jolt through me. "You shouldn't have to feel this alone," I said, my voice lower than I intended. Rachel's eyes flickered, like she was searching for something, an answer, maybe even permission. She shook her head and laughed nervously. "I guess that's just what happens when love fades," she replied. But I didn't believe her. Not when she was looking at me the way she was. We sat there for what felt like hours, the silence growing heavier as the night stretched on. At one point, she stood to clear the table, and I reached out to help. Our hands touched again, this time lingering a second too long. "Sorry," I muttered, pulling away. Rachel smiled, but it was strained. "It's fine." But it wasn't fine. I could feel it, and so could she. As she turned to leave, I felt this overwhelming urge to stop her. "Rachel, wait." She froze and turned back, her eyes wide. "Why do you stay with him?" I asked, my voice more desperate than I intended. Rachel hesitated, her lips parting like she wanted to answer, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know." That was the moment it shifted. Her vulnerability pulled me in, and all the reasons I had to step back suddenly didn't matter. The tension only grew stronger when I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. She didn't move away. Instead, she leaned into my touch. "I shouldn't be here," she said, but her voice betrayed her. "Then why are you?" I asked. Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she stepped closer, and I felt my breath catch. Everything about it was wrong: Laura, Mark, the promises we'd made, but none of it stopped me. I wanted her. And judging by the way she looked at me, she wanted me too. Before I could think, I leaned in, and she didn't stop me. Rachel's breath hitched as my lips hovered near hers. For a split second, I hesitated, but the pull between us was undeniable. When our lips finally met, it wasn't gentle. It was desperate, almost frantic, like we'd both been holding back for far too long. I felt her hands grip the front of my shirt, pulling me closer as if letting go would shatter the moment. Her warmth, her scent, it was intoxicating. My mind screamed at me to stop, to think about Laura, about Mark, but my body refused to listen. We broke apart briefly, both of us breathless. "This is wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," I replied, brushing my thumb across her cheek. "But does it feel wrong?" Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she leaned in again, her lips finding mine with even more urgency. It was like every barrier had crumbled, every unspoken thought finally unleashed. Before I knew it, I was leading her to the guest room. The walk down the hallway felt like an eternity, every step weighed down by a mixture of guilt and excitement. Once inside, the tension boiled over. She let out a shaky breath as I cupped her face. "Tell me to stop, and I will," I said. But Rachel didn't stop me. Instead, she closed the distance between us, her lips finding mine once more as her fingers tangled in my hair. Clothes hit the floor in a blur, and suddenly, there was no turning back. The room felt like it was spinning. Every touch, every whispered word only pulled us deeper into something we both knew we couldn't undo. It wasn't just passion, it was release. For the first time in what felt like forever, we weren't pretending to be okay. Afterward, Rachel lay beside me, her head resting against my chest. The glow of the bedside lamp cast soft shadows across her face, making her look even more vulnerable. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. I didn't have an answer. My mind raced through the consequences, but the only thing I could focus on was how right it felt having her in my arms. "We figure it out," I said, but even I didn't believe my own words. Rachel sighed and sat up, reaching for her clothes. "This can't happen again." But as she turned to leave, I reached for her hand. "Don't go." Her eyes met mine, filled with uncertainty and longing. "Ryan." "I mean it," I said, pulling her back toward me. "I don't want this to be just one night." She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she was going to walk away. Instead, she leaned in and kissed me again, and all the doubts faded into the background. The next morning, reality came crashing back. Rachel slipped out of the guest room early, and by the time Mark woke up, she was already gone. I played it off, pretending nothing had happened, but the guilt gnawed at me. Laura came back that evening, completely unaware of what had taken place while she was gone. She greeted me with a kiss, her excitement about wedding plans spilling out as she unpacked her bags. I forced a smile, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Rachel. Over the next few days, I tried to push her out of my mind, but it was impossible. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was her. When it finally was, my heart raced. "Rachel, can we talk?" I knew it wasn't over, not by a long shot. I sat in my car outside the quiet cafe Rachel had chosen, my fingers drumming nervously against the steering wheel. My phone buzzed, a simple text from her. "I'm inside." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe as I stepped out and walked through the doors. Rachel was already at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She looked different, tired, vulnerable, but still impossibly beautiful. Her eyes lifted to meet mine, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. But as I sat down, reality came rushing back. "Thanks for meeting me," she said softly. I nodded, unsure of what to say. "You sounded like you really needed to talk." Rachel exhaled, her fingers trembling slightly as she set her cup down. I can't stop thinking about that night. Neither could I, but hearing her say it made the weight of it even heavier. "Me either," I admitted. Her eyes darted away. "I know it was wrong. I know we shouldn't have, but—" She paused, her voice cracking. "I don't regret it, Ryan. Not for a second." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't running from it. She wasn't pretending it didn't happen. She was owning it, and that terrified me. "I don't regret it either," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel looked relieved, but also conflicted. "But what do we do now? I can't keep pretending that Mark and I are okay. And you, what about Laura?" "Laura." Just hearing her name made my chest tighten. I thought about the wedding plans, the baby, the life we were supposed to be building together. But none of it felt real anymore. Not since that night. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't have the answers, Rachel." She reached across the table, her hand brushing against mine. "What if we just stop pretending?" Her words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. "You mean leave them? For each other?" Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "What if that's the only way we can be happy?" My heart raced. The thought of walking away from Laura, breaking her heart, and abandoning everything we'd built, terrified me. But the thought of losing Rachel scared me even more. Before I could respond, The sound of the cafe door opening made us both freeze. My stomach dropped as I turned and saw Mark walking in. His eyes scanned the room before locking onto us. For a moment, he just stood there like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then he started walking toward us. "Mark," Rachel started, but he cut her off. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. I stood up instinctively, my palms sweating. "Mark, it's not what it looks like." "Oh, really?" "Because it looks like my wife and my best friend having a cozy little meeting behind my back." Rachel flinched. "Mark, please." "No," he snapped. "You don't get to talk right now." His eyes shifted to me, burning with betrayal. "I trusted you, Ryan. I let you into my life, my home, and this is how you repay me." I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Mark shook his head, his voice breaking. "How long has this been going on? Or should I ask if it's still going on?" Rachel stepped in. "It wasn't planned, Mark. It just happened." "Don't!" Mark shouted, causing a few heads in the cafe to turn. "Don't try to justify this. I loved you, Rachel. I gave you everything." Tears welled up in Rachel's eyes. "No, Mark. You didn't. That's the problem. You stopped caring a long time ago." Mark looked like he'd been slapped. "And that's your excuse for screwing my best friend? Stop it." I snapped, finally finding my voice. "This isn't just her fault, Mark. It's mine too." "Oh, don't worry. I know exactly whose fault it is." Mark's fists clenched, and for a second, I thought he might hit me. But instead, he turned and stormed out, leaving Rachel sobbing in the middle of the cafe. I reached out to comfort her, but she pulled away. "I need time," she said, wiping her tears. "I need to figure out what I'm going to do." And just like that, she was gone, leaving me alone at the table, surrounded by strangers who had witnessed my world unravel in real time. When I got home, Laura was waiting for me, her smile fading the moment she saw my face. "What happened?" she asked, concern filling her voice. I wanted to tell her everything, to confess and beg for forgiveness, but I couldn't do it. "Not yet." "Nothing," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just a long day." But as Laura hugged me, I felt the guilt tighten around my chest, suffocating me. And I knew that no matter what happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The days after the cafe confrontation felt like a blur. Mark hadn't called or texted me since the argument, and Rachel had completely vanished. Meanwhile, Laura continued planning our wedding, oblivious to the chaos unraveling inside me. I felt like I was living two lives, one where I was a devoted fiancé and soon-to-be father, and another where I was drowning in guilt and longing for someone who wasn't mine to have. Every time Laura smiled at me, my stomach churned. I hated myself for betraying her, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about Rachel. One night, Laura sat on the couch flipping through bridal magazines, her excitement filling the room. "What do you think about these centerpieces?" she asked, holding up a picture. I barely looked at it. "They're nice," I muttered. She frowned. "Ryan, you've been so distant lately. Is something wrong?" I froze, feeling my heart pound. "No, I'm fine. Just stressed with work." Laura studied me for a moment before smiling softly. "I get it. But we're in this together, okay?" She reached for my hand, and the warmth of her touch only made the guilt sharper. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Laura slept beside me, unaware that the man she trusted had betrayed her. I knew I couldn't keep lying to her, but the thought of losing her, and our baby, paralyzed me. The next morning, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. "I need to see you." I hesitated, but I knew I couldn't ignore her. We met at a park, away from prying eyes. Rachel looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I left him," she said quietly, her voice trembling. I blinked. "What?" "Mark and I had another fight. I told him the truth about us." My stomach dropped. "You told him everything?" She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I couldn't keep lying. And I couldn't keep pretending our marriage was fixable. I exhaled, my head spinning. "Rachel, what does this mean? For us?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I can't go back to him. I need to figure out what's next. And I need to know where you stand." Her words hit me hard. I wanted to be with her. I couldn't deny that. But choosing Rachel meant destroying Laura and the life we were supposed to have. "I can't leave Laura," I said finally, my voice breaking. "Not now. She's pregnant, Rachel." Rachel's face crumpled. "I can't believe this. After everything." "I'm sorry," I interrupted. "I never wanted to hurt you." She wiped her tears and stepped back. "But you did. And now I have nothing." She turned and walked away, leaving me rooted to the spot, watching her disappear. When I got home, Laura was waiting, her face pale. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice sharp. I froze. What do you mean? I called you. Twice. She held up her phone. Why didn't you answer? Panic surged through me. I was out getting some air. I just needed to clear my head. Laura's eyes filled with suspicion. Ryan, what's going on? You've been acting so strange lately. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. And then her phone buzzed. She picked it up and frowned at the screen. It's Mark, she said. My blood ran cold. Mark. She answered the call. Hey, what's up? Her expression changed as Mark's voice carried through the speaker. I need to tell you something about Ryan. I reached for the phone, but Laura pulled away, her eyes narrowing. What is he talking about? Laura, don't listen to him. But it was too late. Whatever Mark said, it shattered her. Her face turned pale, and tears filled her eyes. Is it true? She whispered, her voice shaking. Did you cheat on me? With Rachel? I couldn't lie anymore. Yes. Laura stepped back, as if my admission had physically hit her. How could you? I trusted you. I loved you. I'm sorry, I said, my voice breaking. I never meant for it to happen. But it did, she snapped. And now what? Am I supposed to just pretend this never happened because we have a baby on the way? Her words hit me hard. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, I said desperately. But Laura shook her head. You can't fix this, Ryan. Not after what you did. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, leaving me alone in the apartment. As the door slammed shut, the weight of my actions came crashing down. I'd destroyed my best friend's marriage, shattered my own, and lost the woman I thought I loved. All because of one reckless decision. The apartment felt emptier than ever after Laura left. Her absence lingered in every corner. Her scent on the pillows, her half-finished bridal magazines still scattered across the coffee table. I stared at the door she'd walked out of, hoping she'd come back. But deep down, I knew she wouldn't. Days turned into weeks, and the silence became unbearable. I tried calling her, leaving messages, and even showing up at her parents' house, but Laura refused to speak to me. Her father answered the door the last time I went, and made it clear I wasn't welcome. You made your choices, Ryan, he said coldly. Now you'll have to live with them. The words stung because they were true. I had made my choices, selfish, impulsive ones. And now I was paying the price. Rachel, too, had disappeared from my life. I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved out of town, leaving Mark behind to pick up the pieces of their broken marriage. I wanted to reach out to her, to make sense of what had happened between us, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. The hardest part was facing myself, really looking in the mirror and confronting who I'd become. I'd always been afraid of vulnerability, terrified of commitment, and too selfish to recognize the damage I was causing to the people who loved me. For weeks, I spiraled, drinking too much, skipping work, and avoiding everyone who tried to check in on me. But eventually, I realized something. I couldn't undo what I'd done, but I could try to be better moving forward. I started therapy, desperate to figure out why I'd sabotaged everything good in my life. The sessions forced me to dig deep, peeling back layers of insecurity and fear that I'd buried for years. I admitted my mistakes, not just to the therapist but to myself. And slowly I began to heal. I reached out to Mark hoping for forgiveness, but he wasn't ready. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you, he said. But I hope you figure yourself out. Laura, on the other hand, never responded to the letter I sent her. I poured my heart out, apologizing for the pain I caused and promising to do better, even if it wasn't with her. Part of me hoped she'd give me another chance, for the sake of our child if nothing else. But I understood why she didn't. Months later, I saw her at the grocery store. She looked happy, or at least happier than she'd been the last time I saw her. I didn't approach her. Instead, I just watched as she smiled and rubbed her growing belly, surrounded by her family. It hurt to know I wasn't a part of that anymore. But I also knew she deserved better than the man I had been. The lessons I learned. Looking back, I realized my biggest mistake wasn't falling for Rachel. It was letting my insecurities control me. I had spent so much time running from real intimacy and sabotaging relationships that I hadn't learned how to build something lasting. Cheating didn't just break Laura's trust. It shattered my own sense of integrity. I'd told myself it was a moment of weakness, but the truth was, it was a series of choices driven by selfishness and cowardice. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that love isn't just about passion or attraction. It's about loyalty, trust, and the willingness to fight for the people who matter most. And sometimes the hardest fight is against your own flaws. I still think about Laura and wonder what might have been if I'd been honest with her about my fears instead of running from them. I think about Rachel, too, and the weight of her unhappiness that drew us together in the first place. But mostly, I think about the man I'm trying to become. The kind of man who doesn't take love for granted and who knows that real happiness doesn't come from chasing temporary thrills. I lost 2 people I cared about, and I'll carry that regret forever. But I'm finally learning to let that regret push me forward instead of holding me back. Because at the end of the day, mistakes don't define you. It's what you do next that matters. What would you do if you were in Ryan's position? Do you believe people deserve a second chance after betrayal? Or is trust impossible to rebuild once it's broken? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking stories like this one. Trust me, the next one is even more unbelievable.